Judicial activism. Let's see what judicial activism means and what it means in the Indian context. Judicial activism is a very important topic in the UPSC Civil Services examination, especially in the mains part of the examination. So let's see what judicial activism means. We all know about the important pillars of our democracy. There are three main pillars in our democracy. One is the legislature, the lawmaking body, which consists of the state legislature, which consists of MLAs, and the central legislature, the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, which consists of the MPs. Second is the executive. Executive is the administrative apparatus, which consists of ministers as well as the civil servants in our country who are responsible for the overall administration and governance of our country. And third is judiciary. Judiciary means the courts, the law courts, which dispense justice in our country. So now let's see what judicial activism means. So legislature is responsible for making laws. Executive is responsible for implementing the laws and overall administration of the country. Now judicial activism, where it comes into play. Whenever the executive as well as the legislature they fail to perform their duties properly, or if they fail to follow the constitutional ethos of the country, at this juncture, during these occasions, the judiciary will step inside to take over the role of the executive as well as the legislature. So this is called as judicial activism. In other words, it simply means a proactive role played by the judiciary for the overall good of the country and its citizens. For example, in the recent past, some years ago, the judiciary stepped in to highlight the problem of manual scavenging in India. We all know what manual scavenging is. Manual scavenging means the practice where people engage in disposal of the waste of other human beings, the excretion of other human beings. This happens especially in the poor and backward North Indian states of India. Manual scavenging is an inhuman practice. So Supreme Court, it actually stepped in and highlighted the problem of manual scavenging in India. It compelled the legislature to enact strict laws for abolition of manual scavenging in India, and it also highlighted to the executive, the civil servants and the ministers in the country to ensure that the practice of manual scavenging does not happen in India anymore. So this is an example of judicial activism, a proactive role played by the judiciary. Judicial activism comes into play mainly during two occasions. One, where the legislature and the executive, they fail to do their job, or in other words, they are ineffective. For example, even after highlighting the importance of Lokpal, we all know about Lokpal, right? It is an anti-corruption body. Even many years after the Supreme Court highlighted the need for a anti-corruption body in India, that is a Lokpal, the central government, it actually failed to set up the body of Lokpal. So the Supreme Court once again stepped in. It actually warned the central government to set up the Lokpal as soon as possible. So this is an example of ineffectiveness of the government, or in other words, the executive. So the Supreme Court, the judiciary stepped in and it actually advised, it warned the government to set up the anti-corruption body. So this is an example where the legislature as well as the executive, they remain ineffective. They play a mute spectator. So it actually compels the judiciary to intervene and play a proactive role. So this is one. The second is where the government, the legislature as well as the executive, they act in an authoritarian way, or in other words, they act in an arrogant way, or where they do not pay attention to the fundamental rights of the citizens. For example, some time ago, the government it tried to implement Aadhaar card. On the other hand, what they did was they actually tried to solve the many problems of corruption, administrative inefficiency, simply through the single tool of Aadhaar. So they compelled people to register with Aadhaar for all the social welfare schemes and other schemes of the government. So this is actually somewhat an authoritarian role played by the government, or otherwise it is the government is actually trying to compel the people to do something but actually the fault lies with the government. So this kind of authoritarian act needs to be checked, or in other words, there are a lot of problems within the government apparatus itself. Corruption cannot be abolished simply by the tool of Aadhaar. So in this situation, the judiciary stepped in to tell the executive, the government, that see, you just cannot compel everyone to submit Aadhaar for all the social welfare schemes. So it held that Aadhaar's card is not mandatory for all the government services. But later the government was forced to bring in a separate Aadhaar Act, which provided safeguard for all the citizens. So this is an example where the judiciary steps in to check the authoritarianness of the government. Apart from this, why judicial activism is needed? As we all know, India is a multicultural community. Uh, and in India there are many minorities. So the citizens of India belong to various religions. Apart from this, the Constitution of India, it prescribes benefits and safeguards for women and other backward sections of society, such as scheduled caste, scheduled tribes, etc. And if you look at the fundamental rights are specifically provided in the Constitution to provide individual rights for the citizens. So whenever a situation comes where the fundamental rights of a citizen gets affected, the judiciary, it steps in to tell the executive and the legislature not to affect the fundamental rights of the citizen. For example, the right to privacy. So right to privacy is actually a part of Article 21, which says that every individual in India has the right to life and personal liberty. So certain things such as snooping by the government. So sometimes the government, it tries to indirectly hack the personal details of citizens. Even Aadhaar was actually argued to be some sort of snooping. So in these cases, the fundamental rights of the citizens get affected. So in such cases, the judiciary steps in to ensure the fundamental rights of the citizens through judicial activism. And there are some cases in which certain other principles, if you take the directive principles of state policy, specifically speaks about the overall welfare of the country. It speaks about respecting the country, respecting the national flag, giving respect for women, etc. Some time ago, the Supreme Court, it actually mandated that people in cinema halls should stand up before the movie starts for the national anthem. So this is also an example of judicial activism. This judicial activism actually, it implemented the fundamental duties. So fundamental duty states what? It tells that people should respect the national flag. It should respect the um, the ethos of the country. So this is actually implemented through judicial activism. So judicial activism, it helps uphold the fundamental rights, it helps uphold the fundamental duties, it helps uphold the directive principles of state policy as well. If you take the directive principles of state policy, it says that it is in the interest of the country to abolish the use of liquor. So this is specifically stated in the directive principles of state policy. So liquor, it is dangerous to society, it is dangerous to the individual. So in this, the judiciary stepped in to ban the sale of liquor. Recently, it actually banned the sale of liquor along national highways within a span of 500 meters. So even though this did not ban the entire sale of alcohol in the country, it had some benefits. For example, if we ban the sale of alcohol in national highways, it is seen that it is actually reducing the accidents in our country, because most drunken people, they drink alcohol, and when they drive, they cause accidents in the country. So this is a simple example of judicial activism. Now there is other criticism of judicial activism as well. Even though judicial activism is beneficial in many aspects, and in the past has helped the society a lot, in certain cases what it happens is that the judicial activism itself, it becomes some sort of a irritation for everyone. So this is actually termed as judicial overreach. So overreach means judiciary, it actually oversteps its role, and it goes a steps further, and it actually somewhat dominates the executive as well as the judiciary. So this is called as judicial overreach.